Hello there everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's Amiibo here, and today I am doing my review of Split Fiction for the PS5. Honestly, I wasn't planning on doing a review of this game, but I had a few people asking for my impressions, and then after I finished the game, I was like, okay, I need to talk about this game in its own dedicated video, because Split Fiction is another co-op masterpiece from Hazelight, EA, and Joseph Fares. It is honestly getting a little unreal how good their games are. I did actually go ahead and get the Platinum Trophy in this game, got all the trophies, all the achievements. I also did this for all of their other games. So if you're unfamiliar with Hazelight, of course, back in the day, Joseph Fares, he did Brothers with 505 Games, which was a single-player game. That recently got remade and they added co-op. That was pretty fun. Then they did A Way Out, that Prison Break game. That was Hazelight's first game as Hazelight, and that was solid. It's not like anything that's going to set the world on fire, but it was good. It was a fun co-op experience in a time where co-op games aren't really being made like this anymore. And then, of course, in 2021, we had It Takes Two, which, as we all know, won Game of the Year that year. And while it wasn't my favorite game of 2021, when I saw it won Game of the Year, I was like, okay, that makes sense. This is an incredible co-op game. Me and Olivia had a ton of fun playing it. And now with Split Fiction, they have once again topped it. I really do think Split Fiction is a better game than It Takes Two. However, I don't know if I like it more than It Takes Two, and we'll get into why, but I do think it's a better game. I really am shocked at how this developer just knows co-op, and they know how to make exciting new gameplay mechanics. There's so much variety in what you're doing in terms of those mechanics. Like, it is nonstop fun. It's like a treasure trove of just nonstop little fun things to do in a video game, and Hazelight just seems to really understand how to win me over with these co-op games. So Split Fiction follows the story of Mio and Zoe, Mio being a sci-fi author and Zoe being a fantasy author, and it starts with them going to a publishing agency trying to get their first books published, and wacky events unfold, and basically they end up being put into their own pieces of fiction. And let me just stop right there, because that is just such a good like gameplay, like story device, because I don't know if Hazelight ever has intention of doing sequels, but with this game, it's sci-fi and fantasy. You could imagine a Split Fiction that goes over different genres. Like, it's really just a good idea to have them be, you know, it's a real world, they're real people, it's not that far-fetched, I guess, but also you're going to these completely fantastical worlds. Just a really, really strong story premise, and the characters are really good as well. At the start, I wasn't in love with Zoe in particular. I thought she was kind of annoying, but by the end of the game, when you learn about both of these characters and their struggles and what, you know, gets them going when they write their pieces of fiction, like, you really come to care for both of them. I actually really like both of them by the end of the game. Now, I played as Mio, who is the sci-fi character, and Olivia was playing as Zoe, the fantasy one, and the game is split up into several different chapters, and essentially you go from doing a big sci-fi section to fantasy, back to sci-fi, back to fantasy, and it has this really great flow where, I mean, pretty much every, like, 2 minutes, they're introducing a new mechanic. Like, it is actually kind of unbelievable how often new things are being thrown at you, but not in a way that necessarily feels, like, overbearing. Like, it's not, like, confusing, at least for me. We'll talk about Olivia's opinions on this game. I had her write down some notes for us here. As someone who doesn't really play games, I know that she struggled with some of the mechanics, and I think it is important to discuss that, because with It Takes Two, that game sold like 20 million copies. I know a lot of people played it with people like their significant others or maybe family members that maybe aren't really into games. So it is definitely important to go into this game knowing, like, it's not as user-friendly, I think, as It Takes Two, which is kind of what I was alluding to. I do think I liked It Takes Two purely because it was a little bit more simple in what you're doing, which meant that me and Olivia, once again, someone who doesn't really play games that often, it meant that we had a much smoother time with it. Split Fiction has a few sections, not that many, but a few sections that are definitely more complex for the average person who is not a gamer to get through than I think It Takes Two had. Specifically in these sci-fi stories, now I don't want to show too much of the game here, but there's one level where you're like a cyborg ninja. That's the first level. And that's very basic. You're just, you know, pressing R2 to slash your sword and hit enemies with that. But then there's one where you have guns and you have to aim. And, you know, for me, I'm having a blast going through these levels, shooting enemies and stuff. But then you have someone like Olivia, who doesn't really play shooters especially, but really just console games in general, who was struggling with aiming. And in general, the sci-fi sections were, I think, a lot harder for her than the fantasy stuff. The fantasy felt a little bit more in line with It Takes Two in terms of just being a little bit more chill. But it's definitely worth noting that this game, I think, is a little less user-friendly than It Takes Two. And because of that, I think my experience playing It Takes Two was stronger. But I do think Split Fiction, especially if you play it with someone who is also an experienced gamer, Split Fiction has way more going on for me playing on my side. Like, it is more fun to play Split Fiction. And like I said, man, it's just that constant variety, that constant barrage of new ideas and mechanics going from sci-fi to fantasy back to sci-fi. There's also side stories, so let's say you're doing the Cyborg Ninja level, you'll find a side story that takes you to a fantasy world just to kind of really mix up the gameplay and just keep that pace going. Or if you're in fantasy, you'll get some sci-fi side stories. The side stories are awesome. I wish there were more of them. I wish they were also maybe paced out a little bit better, because they kind of put them all in the first half of the game, and then the second half doesn't have any. I don't know what's going on with that, but I do really like the side stories. They offer just so much. It's just whimsical, man. And this is kind of what I love so much about It Takes Two. In that game, you play as these little dolls, and you're going like through, you know, these toy lands and stuff like that. And it's just really whimsical. I think Split Fiction is kind of missing a little bit of that, but the side stories definitely do bring a lot of that whimsy from It Takes Two and put it into a different kind of context. So side stories are absolutely awesome. The one they revealed in the trailer was this like hot dog fantasy level. One player can like stretch up tall and bounce. The other player is like farting rainbows and like flying. And then by the end of it, you become a hot dog. Just absolutely masterclass storytelling. Love that. Stuff like that, moments like that are what makes Split Fiction so much fun to play, especially with someone, once again, who doesn't play games that often. You know, it's just a joy, and we're just laughing, losing our minds at how hysterical this scene is. And there are moments like that in this game. I do maybe wish there were a little bit more things like that. Once again, I don't want to spoil anything because a lot of the appeal is just like experiencing it out of nowhere. But specifically in the Cyborg Ninja level, there's like this cyber chase where you're on a bike, and then something happens where Zoe has to do something. If you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. That is one of the funniest moments I've ever experienced in a co-op game. It was absolutely hysterical having Olivia try to figure out what to do. It was just so funny and so much fun. Now, for me, this is more of a nitpick. I think Olivia had more of an issue with it than I did, but while the gameplay variety is there, nonstop new ideas, so many fun mechanics being thrown at you, I do think their view of sci-fi feels a little limited in that every sci-fi level looked the same. Fantasy definitely felt like it had a lot more, at least different visual identities, where with the sci-fi section, yeah, you have that Cyborg Ninja, like sci-fi Tokyo setting or whatever. Most of it is just like dead space hangar in space, and it all kind of just looks like sterile sci-fi, like very basic idea of what sci-fi is. And I feel like, I don't know, there's so much sci-fi that could even take place on Earth, or even just like on a different planet. Every piece of sci-fi section in this game, I feel, looks a little too samey. Mechanically, very different, and I love that. But I do wish that the actual sci-fi stories, the worlds that you're going into, I wish there was a little bit more variety in that regard. Fantasy definitely doesn't suffer as much, especially when you take into account the side stories, because even with the side stories, I feel like their sci-fi interpretation is still very, honestly, kind of shallow. It's like, oh, it's still a space thing, and you're in space. It's like, come on, there's sci-fi is limitless. You can do anything, and you're just putting me on a space hangar in space with like a robot. You can do more than that, I feel like. But those fantasy side stories, man, those are just an absolute treat every single time. I don't think there was a single fantasy side story in this game that I didn't like. Like, they were all just really, really well done. I also just really have to shout out the visuals. This is a game that's, you know, it's not like the most cutting edge thing in the world. It's coming from EA. You have Battlefield over here looking absolutely beautiful and breathtaking. Split Fiction doesn't look like that, right? Like, it's a very different kind of game. It is probably a lower budget, I would imagine. But there are times where the art direction in this really shines. Specifically, there's this one moment in that Cyborg Ninja level where it's like raining and it's nighttime and you see the city lit up, and I was like, oh my goodness, this game looks absolutely beautiful. So there are really just stunning moments and kind of like really nice like cinematography, almost like really just cool looking shots and set pieces that genuinely, like, I was like, whoa, this game is stunning at times. Other times it just kind of looks like it looks good. There's never a moment where it looks bad. I shouldn't say that, but there are times where it looks way better than others. Now, I did ask Olivia to give me some pros and cons Once again, as someone who does not play console games, doesn't play shooters or anything like that, I wanted to get her pulse on this for you all for this review. Now, she wrote down a couple pros and 4 cons, so she had more cons, but she actually said to me, like, it's more so just because, like, it's a little bit easier to nitpick little things than just praise everything, if that makes sense. So that was her thing, because I know she had a great time playing it, but she did write down more cons than pros. So for the pros, first one, she said frequent checkpoints. Yeah, there were a lot of checkpoints in this game, which definitely made, despite there being some, I would say, less than user-friendly mechanics, specifically when you're aiming things and shooting, the checkpoints really just kind of helped with that a little bit, made it a little bit easier to get through for her. There was a good variety of challenges overall, she said. She loved the side stories and wished there were more of them, but also that they could have spread them out more. I actually already said that, so we're on tune there. Yeah, they're all in the first half of the game for some reason. I don't really know why. Maybe plot related, I guess, but also they could have just changed the plot a little bit if that is the case. And then her final pro was visually very pretty game, like I was just talking about. Yes, there are some very stunning moments in this. For her cons, she said there was a lack of variety in creatures/robots, need more different types of sci-fi settings, so that's what I was talking about. I like the little creature mention, though, because I feel like It Takes Two had a ton of little creatures. Split Fiction has, there's like some small little robot guys, I like those, but even in the sci-fi section, she actually pointed this out to me, there's never a hologram in this game. We're talking a sci-fi game, and there's no holograms or like a hologram-themed level. That's a little weird. She said she felt there were too many sliding/on-rail sections. I didn't really have an issue with this. There were a lot of them, though. Like every probably 10 minutes or so, you're sliding down something, you're doing something on rails, you're flying through a section. There's a lot of that in this game, but for me, they definitely, like, there's enough variety there of like, okay, in this one, you're on a snowboard or something, or whatever the case may be. So for me, there was enough variety there, but she didn't love all of those. She said they needed more fun surprise moments, like the spoiler, the thing I was talking about and alluding to earlier in the cyborg section. That was her favorite moment in the game, as well as mine. So needed more fun moments like that, in her opinion. And also, she said there wish that there had been an actual blend of sci-fi and fantasy, like, let's say, robots in a medieval tale. That's actually what I thought the game was going to be. When they announced this, I thought it was going to be Split Fiction. Like, literally, one player is in the sci-fi section, one player is in the fantasy section, and maybe those two worlds are kind of mixing together. Their stories are interchanging a little bit there, where you're in fantasy land and there's robots, or if you're in the sci-fi section and then a dragon comes out. Like, I definitely thought there was going to be more of that, just based on the one trailer I watched and based on the premise and name. But also, that would have been, I feel like, way harder to design and make, so I understand why they did it the way they did. So those were the notes that she gave me. She definitely had a good time playing it, but also I know that she was a little bit more frustrated coming off of It Takes Two, which I'm sure we had some moments of like frustration of like, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, but I don't really remember any standout moments. There were a couple of moments in Split Fiction, specifically anytime there's like a motorcycle or a thing you have to shoot, like anything like that is a little bit harder. So yeah. This game definitely had more, I guess, frustrating moments than It Takes Two, which is why I think I like It Takes Two more. But in terms of like a pure like gameplay standpoint, I do think Split Fiction is a stronger game, has more gameplay variety. Like even in the back half of the game, they were still doing stuff mechanically that was just like blowing me away. Like, whoa, we're doing that right now. So if you are someone who is here for gameplay first, if you want to have a fun co-op experience with your friend, your partner, whatever, Split Fiction is, in my opinion, an absolute must-play. I have some nitpicks with it, but honestly, these things are so small in the grand scheme of things. This is an absolute all-timer, great co-op game, and if you haven't played It Takes Two, I highly recommend that as well. I recommend A Way Out as well, but It Takes Two and Split Fiction are like next level. These are some of the best video games. I really, really love that Hazelight has really come into their own in terms of making these higher budget co-op games, and they actually get the attention they deserve. It makes me so happy to see games like this succeeding. It already sold over 1 million copies, had a huge launch on Steam. Very good stuff, very consumer friendly. If you buy one copy, you get a friend's pass that you can give to a friend, so they don't need to buy it. So if you want to play it locally, you can. That's what we did. But you can also play it online, and your friend doesn't have to buy a copy if you buy one. So very consumer friendly all around, no microtransactions. They're very proud of that over at Hazelight. So very cool stuff. I highly recommend Split Fiction. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you checked the game out? Are you planning on picking it up? And also, have you played It Takes Two? And if you didn't like It Takes Two, just let me know why. Like, if you're not into these co-op games, I would really like to know why, because to me, as someone who loves all types of games, these are very much gameplay first, and they are so much fun. So let me know your thoughts. Of course, subscribe here for more reviews, but also collecting content, Nintendo content mostly, as well as follow me on Twitter at BoTalksGames, and check out my Nintendo news channel at BoTalksGames as well. Until then, you can watch another video by clicking on one of these boxes here, and until next time, peace.